Most tales of the Vikings tell of their daring exploits, exploring new lands and forging paths into the unknown. Yet while many of these Norse adventurers will remain nameless, a select few have been immortalized in the sagas of their era. Among these famous Vikings is Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red and grandson of Thorvald Asvaldsson. Today, he is celebrated as the first European to set foot in America, nearly 500 years before the famed explorer Columbus. Considering the vast distance between Scandinavia and America, Leif's feat is quite audacious. It also begs the question of what inspired this remarkable journey, and was his discovery a stroke of luck or a calculated voyage? The tale of Leif's journey to America begins with his grandfather, Thorvald, and his father, Erik the Red. In the second half of the 10th century, they were forced to leave their native Norway after killing a man and headed to Iceland, a place where other Norsemen had already settled. In Iceland, Erik married Thjodhild, the daughter of a well-to-do Icelandic farmer who later bore him Leif. As a wedding gift, Erik's father-in-law gave him some land on the western part of the island, where Erik built a home for himself and his family. One would have thought that Erik's tumultuous experience in Norway would have taught him the perils of letting anger rule his actions, but alas, it was not to be. One day he got into a brawl with two men, one of whom had killed his slave. As the fight escalated, Erik, who was fiercer than both of them, ended up killing them brutally. For this crime, he was banished from his home in Iceland and forced to settle on a small island nearby. But the lesson of restraint eluded him still. Erik soon found himself in another deadly conflict, resulting in more bloodshed. His punishment was stiffer this time, as it was not a first-time offense. He was outlawed for 3 years, implying that anyone could kill him on sight during the period the sentence lasted. To escape this grim fate, Erik set his sights on a distant, uncharted land to the northwest of Iceland, where he could vanish from those who might seek his life. After 3 long years, Erik's ban ended. All this while, he had pined for home and wanted to see it again, and upon his return, he told other Vikings tales of the land he had found, trying to convince them of the potential of the new land he had discovered. He even named it Greenland, reasoning that an attractive name would entice more settlers, and soon enough, many were convinced to follow him back to Greenland. During Erik's back-and-forth journeys, his son Leif was by his side, absorbing the skills of seafaring and trading. But unlike his father, who was driven by necessity, Leif's bond with exploration grew out of a deep love for adventure. As Leif matured, his navigational skills sharpened with each passing year. By the age of 24, he had honed his expertise to the point where he was ready to captain his own voyage. This would be no ordinary journey. It was a significant expedition to reconnect with his roots in Norway, a land now under the rule of the influential king, Olaf. Leif knew that reaching Norway would be challenging, despite the Vikings' longship's resilience against the fiercest of elements. Undeterred, he set sail with more than a dozen men to achieve his goal. As expected, the journey was filled with challenges. The seas were turbulent, with relentless storms and fickle winds threatening to thwart their progress. When he finally arrived in Norway, he was met with a warm reception from King Olaf, who was shocked that Leif had expertly navigated himself across such a distance at such a young age. Leif was then allowed to stay for a while, enjoying all the luxuries King Olaf offered him. At some point during Leif's stay in Norway, King Olaf convinced him to convert to Christianity and be baptized. He eventually returned to Greenland, along with a priest, to spread Christianity among other Vikings. However, soon after Leif's return, he felt the familiar itch of exploration and was determined to journey to a land unlike any he had previously encountered. Different sagas provide varying accounts of what inspired Leif's destination for this voyage. Some suggest that during his return to Greenland after visiting King Olaf, the weather conditions for the crossing were particularly harsh. His ship was tossed about at sea for a long time, and he eventually stumbled upon an unexpected land. Intrigued by the new terrain and crops, he made a mental note to return and explore further. Other accounts propose that the tales of a Viking named Bjarni inspired Leif. Bjarni had been on his way to visit his father in Greenland when he encountered fierce northerly winds that drove his ship far off course. He ended up on a forested coast that did not resemble the Greenland he was familiar with. Rather than exploring the area, Bjarni recalibrated his course and eventually reached Greenland. Upon his arrival, he shared his extraordinary story with his fellow Vikings, which left a lasting mark on Leif's curiosity. Regardless of which account is true, one thing is certain. Leif Erikson set sail in pursuit of these new lands. He acquired a new ship, gathered around 35 men, and stocked ample supplies before embarking on the journey. They first traveled up the western coast of Greenland and then headed west for about 600 miles before discovering land. This terrain was not lush and forested. Instead, it was composed of tall glaciers and rocks. It offered little that Leif and his men could not have found back in Greenland, but nevertheless, he sent in a shore party, perhaps out of a sense of duty or curiosity. The shore party did some hunting and quickly found that the region was full of foxes. Unsurprisingly, they bagged as many as possible for their valuable fur and meat, which clearly would have helped them on their voyage. Eventually, they left the place, but not before Leif named it Helluland, which translates to Slabland. From Helluland, Leif and his men sailed further south, eventually reaching a forested region he named Markland, or Forestland. This area, located on the eastern coast of what is now Canada, was filled with trees and vegetation, signifying to Leif that they had finally found the fertile and lush land they had been searching for. However, rather than pause the voyage here, Leif felt that even better resources might be found if they journeyed further south, so they continued. Eventually, they landed in an even better region, now known as modern-day Newfoundland. This land, as lush as Markland, had a plentiful supply of salmon and was covered in pastures suitable for their cattle. Seeing this, Leif decided there was no need to go any further and settled there. They chose to build houses for themselves at a site later dubbed Leifsbuder, in the vicinity of modern-day L'Anse-aux-Meadows, Newfoundland. For months, they immersed themselves in all the comforts the area offered, which seemed far greater than what they had in Greenland. However, unlike the other places they passed by and quickly named, Leif was in no hurry to do the same here. Perhaps this was because he had no immediate intention to leave. This changed one particular day during their stay, due to an unlikely discovery. On that day, one of Leif's men went missing while gathering supplies. When Leif finally found him, he was drunk and happily babbling about some berries he had discovered. He and the crew were delighted with this find and subsequently named the place Vinland, meaning land of wine. Leif eventually returned to Greenland after spending at least one winter exploring Vinland. He and his crew loaded their boats with the berries they had found and timber to prove their achievements. Leif may have planned to return, but he never did, choosing to stay in Greenland and continue spreading Christianity. However, his brother, Thorvald, undertook a second expedition to Vinland, during which he was killed in a fight with an indigenous people known to them as Skraling. Subsequent Viking expeditions to Vinland either ended in failure or, upon arrival, found that establishing a permanent settlement so far from home proved too difficult, leading them to return home. Beyond the sagas telling the tale of Leif's voyage, archaeological evidence has proven that Leif and his crew might have settled in L'Anse-aux-Meadows. 10 jasper firestarter fragments discovered in and around the Norse buildings within the location were analyzed and compared to samples from various locations, including Norway, Iceland, Greenland, and several places along the eastern coast of the United States. The analysis revealed that some of the jasper fragments came from Greenland and Iceland, meaning that the only likely conclusion was that Leif and his men brought them along during their voyage.